Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. You know, Robert Frost's words, they really stick with you, don't they?
They do, that sense of something precious but fleeting.
Exactly. A reminder that even things we think of as permanent, like, well, Antarctic ice maybe, are subject to change. And sometimes that change makes the gold really, really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into the sources you provide, looking for the key insights.
That's right.
And today, we're looking at something that feels, well, pretty urgent. It's crucial for understanding what's happening globally and may be particularly relevant if you're tracking environmental science for exams, perhaps like the UPSC.
Definitely relevant there.
We're focusing on a recent article from The Conversation. It's shedding light on a truly iconic species, the emperor penguin, and the danger therein as Antarctic sea ice vanishes.
Such incredible birds. You picture them, huddled against those Antarctic blizzards, icons of resilience.
Totally. But as this article really brings home, their amazing adaptations are being pushed to the limit by something they just can't adapt to fast enough.
It's happening too quickly.
So our mission today is to unpack what this research, the research in your source material, actually found. We need to understand why these penguins are in trouble and what it tells us about climate change hitting even the most remote places.
Okay, let's get into it.
Right, so maybe start with the basics the article mentions. What makes emperors different from, say, seals or Adelie penguins when the Antarctic winter hits?
Well, it's fascinating, actually. Most species, like you said, seals, adelies, they tend to head north as winter approaches, towards the edge of the expanding sea ice, where there's still open water.
Right, following the food or escaping the worst cold.
Exactly. But emperors, they do the complete opposite. They travel south, deeper into the continent, right onto what's called fast ice.
Okay, so they double down on the cold. And this fast ice, the article stresses how vital it is. What exactly is it and why is it so critical for them?
Fast ice is the key term here. It's sea ice that's, well, fastened or attached to the coastline itself, or maybe grounded icebergs. It doesn't drift.
Okay. It's stable.
Precisely.
Right.
And it needs to be stable because it's their breeding ground, their nursery platform, for about 9 critical months.
9 months. That's,
Nah.
wow. That's a huge chunk of the year to rely on ice staying put. What's happening during that time?
It's this incredible cycle of endurance. They form these big colonies on the fast ice, usually around March or April, right as winter's setting in.
Yeah.
And from then, it takes roughly 9 months for a chick to hatch, grow, and become independent enough, strong enough to face the ocean.
And the source mentions the parents have very distinct roles during this. The males have the first really tough job.
Oh, absolutely. The males basically stand there through the worst of the winter, huddling together for warmth, balancing that single precious egg on their feet. They barely move for weeks on end.
Unbelievable endurance.
It really is. Meanwhile, the females have made this long trek back to the open sea, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, to feed. They need to build up their reserves: krill, fish, squid.
So they're refueling after laying the egg.
Exactly. They usually return around July or August, just as the chicks are hatching, and then they take over the feeding duties.
It's a massive effort from both. And you mentioned the chicks face a kind of deadline, something about needing special feathers.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial. By December, when summer arrives in Antarctica, those chicks must have molted their downy fluff and grown their dense, waterproof adult plumage.
Like getting their wetsuit ready.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Without that waterproof layer, they just can't survive the frigid southern ocean water. Even a brief plunge is fatal.
And the article pointed out something interesting about where on the ice they set up shop, this Goldilocks zone idea. Why is the location so tricky?
It's a real balancing act. They need to be far enough inland from the edge of the fast ice so they're safe from ocean swells. A big wave could break up the ice prematurely.
Right. Disaster for the colony. You need stability.
Definitely. But on the other hand, they can't be too far from that edge.
Why not?
Because the edge is where the adults access the open water to hunt for food. If the colony is, say, tens of kilometers inland, the trips back and forth become incredibly long and energy-sapping.
Meaning fewer meals for the chicks, potentially.
Potentially, yeah, or just much more stressed parents.
Yeah.
But the biggest risk, the one climate change is really amplifying, isn't usually being too far inland. It's the whole platform breaking up too soon.
Too soon meaning before the chicks have those waterproof feathers.
Precisely. If that 9-month window gets cut short, if the fast ice disintegrates in, say, November, instead of holding firm into December or January.
The chicks end up in the water unprepared.
Exactly. They're forced into that freezing ocean without their protective gear, and tragically, they perish very quickly.
And the source is clear. This kind of early breakup is happening more often now. How is climate change the driver here?
It's pretty direct, unfortunately. Rising global temperatures mean the Southern Ocean is warming. That warming means the sea ice forms later in the autumn, it doesn't extend as far, and crucially, it melts or breaks up earlier in the spring and summer.
Disrupting that whole 9-month cycle.
Completely disrupting it. It shrinks that essential window they need for breeding success.
And the consequence the article highlights is stark. When these early breakups happen frequently, colony sizes just plummet.
It's a direct cause and effect. Devastating.
And this isn't just theory. The article dives into some pretty alarming findings from new research. Tell us about that specific study.
Yes, the research comes from the British Antarctic Survey, or BAS. They did a really focused study looking closely at a number of emperor penguin colonies.
How did they monitor them? It's not exactly easy to get down there and count penguins year-round.
No, definitely not. They use satellite imagery. It's become a really powerful tool for observing these remote, vast areas over long periods.
Makes sense. And what kind of time frame are we talking about?
They analyzed images spanning from 2009 right up to 2024, so that gives a solid 15-year window to see trends.
15 years of eyes in the sky. Where exactly did they focus? Do they look at all of Antarctica?
No, they concentrated on a specific region, 16 colonies located south of South America. Geographically, this covers the Antarctic Peninsula area and the Weddell Sea.
Okay, a significant area known for emperor penguins. So what did 15 years of satellite data show for those 16 colonies?
Well, the results were pretty sobering. Across those colonies, they measured an average decline in numbers of 22% over that 15-year period.
22%?
Yeah.
Just in that region, just 15 years. That sounds steep.
It is. The article breaks it down further. It works out to a drop of about 1.6% every single year in the populations they studied.
Wow. And the article quotes the lead author, Peter Fretwell, on how alarming that rate is.
Yes, that was a particularly striking point. Fretwell stated that this observed rate of loss is roughly 50% worse than even the most pessimistic scientific predictions had suggested before.
50% worse than the worst-case scenarios they'd modeled.
That's what the research indicates for that region, yes. It really underlines how rapidly things might be changing, potentially faster than our models could fully capture.
It suggests the ice conditions there are deteriorating even more quickly than feared.
It certainly points that way for the Antarctic Peninsula and Weddell Sea area, yes.
So if we kind of zoom out from this specific study, emperor penguins are increasingly seen as like a poster child for climate impacts in the poles, right? Similar to polar bears in the Arctic.
Absolutely. They're such specialized animals, evolved over, they think, maybe 1 million years to thrive in this incredibly harsh environment. They were a highly successful species.
And the numbers involved aren't small. The article mentions a 2009 estimate.
Yeah, back then, the total global population was estimated at just under 600,000 birds. So while this study focused on one region, a 22% decline there suggests a potentially massive loss for the species if that trend holds or applies elsewhere.
Which brings up the limitation the study was focused on that specific area, south of South America. Do we know if things are this bad everywhere else in Antarctica?
That's a really important caveat the article notes. This was the Antarctic Peninsula and Weddell Sea. We don't have the data yet to say definitively if this exact rate of decline is happening continent-wide. Conditions vary around Antarctica.
But even with that regional focus, the overall message seems clear. The source really emphasizes that Antarctica isn't somehow protected from climate change.
Not at all. It states very clearly that Antarctica and all its unique life are absolutely feeling the heat, literally, from ongoing global greenhouse gas emissions. The impacts are undeniable, even there.
So given these worrying trends, what's the official conservation status of emperor penguins? Are they recognized as being in danger?
Well, it varies a bit. The United States, for instance, officially listed them as endangered back in 2021. That decision was based on projections showing a really high risk of extinction by the end of this century if emissions aren't drastically cut.
Okay, so the U.S. has recognized the threat.
Yes. But the article points out, interestingly, that Australia hadn't listed them as threatened at the time of writing. So there's sometimes a lag or difference in how different nations assess the risk or apply listing criteria.
Regardless of the specific listing, though, The science coming out, like this study, paints a pretty bleak future if things continue as they are.
It really does. The source article is quite blunt about it. It
Mhm.
basically says the future of these iconic birds is not looking good.
And it directly links their fate back to the root cause.
Absolutely. It concludes by saying, pretty much, until the world gets serious about cutting greenhouse gas emissions, the sea ice will keep retreating, and more of these chicks are going to end up in the water before they're ready.
It's a very direct connection.
Cause and effect Lake Bear.
Okay, so let's circle back now and connect this directly to you, the listener. Maybe you're studying for the UPSC. Maybe you're just someone who wants to stay informed on major global issues. Why is digging into this story about penguins and ice so important?
Well, for several reasons. If you're tackling something like the UPSC mains, you often need concrete examples for topics like climate change impacts, biodiversity loss, or environmental issues in polar regions. This study gives you exactly that.
Real data points.
Precisely. You can reference the 22% decline, the 1.6% annual rate, the 15-year time frame, the specific location Antarctic Peninsula, Weddell Sea. It shows you're not just making general statements, you're using evidence from recent scientific research, like this article in The Conversation, to back up your points. It demonstrates that critical analysis skill.
Good point. And for prelims, those specific facts could easily pop up, couldn't they?
Absolutely. Things like the species name, their key habitat requirement, fast ice, the locations involved, maybe even the U.S. endangered listing status. These are all potential factual recall questions.
And just for general knowledge, beyond exams.
Look, it's a powerful story, isn't it? It makes the abstract idea of rising global temperatures very real, very tangible. You see the direct impact on a creature many people know and love in an environment we think of as pristine. It really drives home the interconnectedness of our planet and the urgency of the climate challenge.
And understanding the how scientists use satellite data, how they measure population changes, how they identify these trends, like the loss being worse than expected, that builds your ability to critically assess information generally.
Yeah, which is a vital skill for anyone these days, navigating news and information. It helps you understand the science behind the headlines.
Right. So just to quickly summarize the core finding from our deep dives into this source, research focusing on 16 emperor penguin colonies in the Antarctic Peninsula Weddell Sea area found a really worrying average decline of 22% between 2009 and 2024.
And that loss is tied directly to the fast ice breaking up too early in the season, which is a direct result of warming oceans caused by our greenhouse gas emissions.
It really highlights the vulnerability of even highly specialized species in these sensitive ecosystems.
Even the toughest creatures adapted to the most extreme places.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Here we have the emperor penguin, a species that evolved over maybe a million years to master the Antarctic cold. And now the very foundation it relies on, the fast ice, is literally disappearing from under its feet because the planet is warming. What does the struggle of this incredibly resilient bird tell us about our own challenges, our own species' relationship with a rapidly changing Earth, and the sheer urgency of tackling global emissions?
It's a profound question. What part of this discussion resonated most with you, or what questions does it leave you asking?
This deep dive is just one part of our series where we explore these kinds of critical current affairs topics, really useful whether you're preparing for exams like the UPSC or just aiming to be better informed. If you found this valuable, please do consider liking and subscribing. It really helps us know what topics are hitting the mark for you.
And definitely leave a comment below. Any questions you still have or thoughts this sparked, we'd love to hear them and maybe explore them in future deep dives.